Hey, folks, welcome to the Accessible Hunter podcast. I'm Greg Trainer, along with my co host, Mike Hudson. And today we got our buddy, Randy Ferguson, on, and he's the executive director of Hunters Sharing the Harvest here in PA. Mike, what's going on down in South Carolina, bud?
Hey man, today we've actually got some decent weather. Rain finally stopped. We went through a whole spat where it seemed like we couldn't get a raindrop, for about a month. And then it's been a monsoon. Every day is just dumping. Temperatures are rebounding a little bit, so we were super hot. And then it dropped off, and then we were in the 70s. Now we're booming back up. We're going to be back in the 80s and 90s next week. But man, I'm just excited. We got fall coming. You know how it is as a quadriplegic dude. I'm not looking forward to the cold, but I'm kind of looking forward to get away from those 90 and 100 days.
I agree with you, Mike. Randy and I are both here in Pennsylvania. We're about an hour apart, and the last 2 weeks it was in the 90s, and then it dropped down into the 80s. So, Randy, are you a hot weather guy? Are you a beach guy? Or you like the fall temperatures?
I'm a fall temperature guy. I liked what we had here the last week when it was like in the 70s, maybe upper 70s, low 80s at the most. The humidity was down. That's my
Yeah.
kind of world. I love South Carolina, Mike. My daughter and son-in-law and my grandbabies are down there in Somerville, but boy, when you get that heat and if you've had rain in the last 24 hours, that humidity's like a blanket.
Hey, dude, it's one of those things you can't explain it to people until you're trying to cut through it. It's a real deal, man.
Yeah, it's a different world.
Here in PA, we've already started hunting season with the agricultural tags. Mike, I don't know if you have that down in South Carolina, but I know Randy's already getting busy with some donations. And Randy, if you don't mind, we've had you on the podcast before, but for the folks that are just listening and may not be familiar with the Hunters Sharing the Harvest program, you want to tell us a little bit about it, maybe how it started and what the whole process is like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Hunter Sharing Harvest is Pennsylvania's venison donation program. We're a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. A lot of people kind of have an assumption that we're part of the Game Commission or something like that because we have a very close relationship with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Pennsylvania Department of Ag, and so forth. But we are a standalone charitable organization, and basically the way the history unfolds for us is back in 1991. It actually kind of predates 1991, but it was in the middle of the 80s that this organization was really kind of started under a different name. But in 1991 is when we adopted our charter and so forth, and we were, to our knowledge, the first, or definitely one of the first, wild game donation programs in the country to come up with this kind of novel idea of hunters sharing their harvest with people in their community that are hungry. In Pennsylvania, the sort of the way the whole thing developed was that game wardens with the game commission for many years had already kind of been as sort of a one-off and individual type of thing, would donate deer that maybe they confiscated from an illegal kill, or maybe if it was a deer that they had to dispatch that had been hit on the road or something like that, and they knew that that venison was still perfectly good to eat and so forth, they would make sure it got to families in need in their local communities. So it was already kind of happening at that level. But the two gentlemen that founded our organization, John Plowman and Ken Brandt, John was actually a staffer with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and then Kenny Brandt was a state representative in Dauphin County. And the two of them had a lot of connections within Harrisburg. They knew the movers and shakers there. John was obviously very involved with the Game Commission and knew everybody there. And they basically came up with this idea that why don't we try and expand this sort of thing that game wardens have been doing and make it something that the public can take part in, that the hunters across Pennsylvania can do. And that's where the whole thing began, and the idea all along was that the way this model will work is if the hunter doesn't have to pay for that processing. If you really want to encourage people to donate a deer, it's pretty hard to ask them to pay that processing bill too. And then donate the deer on top of that. We've always considered that donating the deer is the good that you're doing there. You shouldn't also have a financial stake in things. But for years and years, to sort of help fund the program, we asked for what we called a $15 copay. It wasn't an absolute requirement, but we asked the hunter if they would chip in that portion, and that helped us just sort of, start to build some funding. And that was the way it operated for probably the 20 years or so. And then as the program grew and we got a lot more corporate support, especially from the oil and gas industry here in Pennsylvania, which was just booming in the 2010 to 2012, 14, 15 range. I mean, they're still going strong, but that was really kind of the heyday right there. And that whole community kind of stepped up and said, we want to be able to be responsible for eliminating that copay for hunters. So we have not had a copay of any sort for 10 to 12 years now.
Randy, man, it's exciting to see everything that you guys are doing, to see more hunters get back into conservation on so many different levels. We were looking through some of the numbers that you guys produce, and some of the people don't understand the amount of the sheer weight that you guys produce. And we were looking at like 2023, and right before we started this thing, you guys had 261,000 pounds of venison donated. That's mind blowing, and that was in 23-24. And so
Right.
how did your 25 come out?
So we actually just wrapped that up, and you're hearing it here first. But we finally got all the figures in for last year, just in time to start a new season, of course. But last
Yeah.
year we had a yet another record-breaking year. We had 284,000, just shy of 284,000 pounds of venison donated, and that was from about 7,800 deer across the state. So,
Wow.
these Pennsylvania hunters just keep blowing me away from year to year. I've gotten to the point now where I don't even question whether they're capable of breaking another record because I can just about count on it every year. But yeah, you think about 280 some thousand pounds of venison. It's pretty mind-boggling. I've looked it up here and there, and you look at things that weigh that amount of money to try and put it in perspective, and it's things like blue whales or a B-52 bomber fully loaded with ordnance and so
Right.
forth that weighs that kind, and it starts to put it in perspective for us. And we always measure things in what is the effectiveness of our organization? What are we providing to the food insecure? So we look at servings. How many servings of this high protein, lean venison are we providing, our Pennsylvania hunters providing to the hungry? So you take 284,000 pounds of venison and you figure it's about a quarter of a pound per serving. So a pound yields about 4 servings. So you're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.2 million servings of venison that were provided through food banks, soup kitchens, you name it, all around the Commonwealth last year.
Those are
Wow.
just amazing numbers, especially when you consider, the cost of food right now. People are having difficulties buying high protein meals for their family, and you're donating over 1 million servings to Pennsylvania families. Randy, we can't thank you enough, and the processors, donating their time. I'm sure they're given a break on the cost of processing these deer and getting them to the food banks and to the people that need it. And about how many processors are taking part in this program in a year?
So we have over 100 processors right now. We've somewhere around 110 processors across the state. And we tend to be pretty critical of that number ourselves. Like we always want to have more processors because we do have some parts of the state where we really could use some where we don't have them, and some of them are in pretty high deer donation counties. But then I look at some of my counterparts across the country and I think, well, we've got it pretty darn good here in PA. I know that even in South Carolina, where you're at, Mike, and some of the others, they've got
Right.
great programs that are really starting to grow and get their legs, but a lot of them are saying, "Boy, I wish I had anywhere near that number of processors in my state." There's a lot of hunters that are traveling quite a distance sometimes to find a processor, but we've got about 100 of them. And the way that works too is that, we make sure these guys get paid. So we negotiate a rate with them per deer so that they get paid because, again, we also don't want them to feel like they need to augment that what we pay them by asking the hunter or anybody else to chip in some extra money because, again, we're telling that hunter there will be no cost to you. So we want to make sure that the processors are able to make a living. We know that these guys are running operations just like so many other sort of family run uh, generational type businesses where they're struggling from year to year to really make a profit margin. Sometimes it's hard to find good labor. Sometimes the younger generation in that family just isn't so interested in cutting deer for a living. So
Yeah.
we're very cognizant of that because we know that this program without the processors fails. So we want to try and keep them happy to the extent possible. And so That's kind of the key to the whole thing is the processors having enough of them and making sure that we've provided enough reason for them to participate with us other than just doing some good because, we know they would all help out their communities as much as possible, but they're also trying to run a business and they're busy as heck through deer season. So, to ask them to do something like this and like you mentioned, typically it's at a discounted rate. I don't think there's any processors that we're paying their full processing rate that they would
Right.
for the public to have a deer cut up. So it's
Yeah.
coming to us at a bargain, but it's still a huge cost for us each year.
You know, Randy, can you explain how the process works from actually harvesting the animal to getting it to the processor? You said a lot of guys are traveling pretty good distances. How does that work?
So we try and make the process as easy as possible. What I always tell people to do is the first thing you should do is just like anything else when you're planning your hunt. You need to think about the things you're going to be doing once you've got that deer on the ground. So we always encourage people to look in their local county or whatever county it is that they're going to be harvesting deer, find out who your participating processors are with our program. And especially like this time of year, for instance, if you're filling an ag tag or something like that, working on a farmer's property to harvest deer, this is definitely a time of year where you should be calling ahead to your processor and make sure that they're even open and accepting deer right now. A
Yeah.
lot of these a lot of these businesses are a deer cutting operation from basically October through January, but the other parts of
Hmm.
the year they might be running some other kind of business, a landscaping business or you name it. So you want to make sure that that processor is going to be accepting deer. And then from there, it's just a matter of you harvest that deer, you tag it, you make sure it's field dressed, and then you take it to one of our processors. That's pretty much all there is to it. When you get to the processor, they're going to have you fill out a donor receipt for us. That's really just where we capture information about you so that we can reach out to you and thank you for that donation and put you on our mailing list. And then we're going to capture data about the harvest. Was it a rifle harvest? Was it archery? Was it an antlered deer or an antlerless deer? Was it harvested with a special tag like ag tag or DMAP or something like that, so that we can sort of keep track of how donations are coming in, and see those trends there because that's pretty important to us then when we're looking at the program and trying to figure out uh, where the donations are coming from and where we need to maybe work harder for looking for financial supporters and things of that nature. So, but the process for the hunter is pretty simple. It's just about as basic as what you would do if you were taking it to have it processed for your family.
Randy, with processing so much venison and dealing with 100 uh, butchers and processors, where does the money come through donations? What's the biggest challenge that your organization has in supporting this and making it all run? Because everything costs money. I mean, getting the gas to deliver the meals is gone up. Everything's going up. How do you get the donations and how do you support it financially? How can we help?
Yeah, when I look at this organization, it's like so many others. It sounds very simple in nature, but when you're in this seat, there's a whole lot of moving parts that you're concerned about all day, every day. And for me, the biggest really is funding because the key to our operation is the fact that we're paying for all of these deer to be processed. And you can do the math pretty easy when it comes to what it might cost for an operation like this, but those 280,000 pounds of venison cost us probably very close to $600,000 in processing fees last year. So that's just processing fees. That's not our whole budget or anything like that. It's the vast majority of our budget, obviously. But so the funding of a program that's growing at the exponential rate that ours is kind of that double-edged sword. Like our growth is wonderful. We're super excited about it. We're looking to the future and will next year be our first 300,000 pound year? And then I'm sitting on the backside saying, okay, but I got to have enough money to pay for all this. So,
Right.
so we're always in fundraising mode. And, you asked about where the funding comes from. It pretty much comes from a diverse source or a diverse list of sources. So, like any fundraising organization, we're writing grants all year round and getting grants from different charitable foundations and things like that. Obviously, individual donors that get on our website and give us $25 or $100 or whatever they can. Corporate sponsors, The Pennsylvania Game Commission and the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture also support us because they realize how much this program is really central to what they're doing too. You know, the Game Commission is trying to manage the deer herd across the state, and so they want to encourage the use of the tags that they've allocated for hunters. So it certainly makes sense for them. The Department of Ag, the same way, they've been supportive of us for years. They sort of they have oversight to a certain extent over the charitable food system and that type of thing. So there's an interest there. They know that farmers have big problems with crop damage from deer these years. So, you know, there's that type of synergy there between those organizations. So we get the funding from all sorts of different places, but at any given time, it can be a real stress because sometimes those funds don't come. Most all of it is, you know, non-guaranteed. It's
Right.
as it's available. So you're always clamoring for that funding.
You know, you mentioned something that's really a difficult thing sometimes to be able to justify or even be able to quantitate. And that's, you know, what funding's coming in, what's being cut, where are we going to be able to continue processing. But what are some of the strategies you guys use to get in new hunters or marketing tools in which you can show people what you guys are doing?
Well, that's the beauty of a program like this. I think that this kind of novel mission as what we call hunting as social service. So that's like kind of a totally different way of looking at hunting. Most people,
Yeah.
you know, we look at ourselves as hunters and conservationists, and the public looks at us in whatever color that they look at hunting and so forth. But uh, what happens with a program like this is you've got this really wonderful thing that's going on here, and you've got hunters that are truly helping people in their local communities that are struggling. And so that in itself is like the perfect news story. So we find that there's a lot of attention from the media that's interested in finding out about our program. And then just the fact that, you know, we're out there on social media talking about what we do, and the word of mouth is just tremendous here in this state. The hunting community, you know, it's one that really communicates with each other and takes advantage of social media and things like that to really talk about issues related to hunting. So, and then we look at things like the R3 movement and who's doing things in the
Mhm.
state to try and encourage more hunters, to bring women, young people, minorities, all of these folks, you know, people who have disabilities, you know, finding ways to make it more accessible for them and more, you know, opportunities there because we know that here in Pennsylvania and across the country, you know, hunter numbers have either plateaued or they're on a sort of steady decline these days. So we need to do everything we can to encourage people to learn about hunting, mentored hunts, things of that nature that are really there's a lot of that type of thing going on here in PA, and of course it's happening in states all across the country. So we try to latch on to those type of movements as well and make sure that we're a part of it, at least within the capabilities of our organization to help out, and if nothing else to get involved with those type of initiatives, because by filling that pipeline with new hunters, we're gonna eventually fill that pipeline with more venison donations as well.
Randy, you mentioned the R3 program and the retention and recruitment. The Game Commission's actually, I think, doing a really good job with that this year, and they've reached out to me about people with disabilities, how they can do a better job making the outdoors more accessible for people in chairs, and to kind of encourage hunters, with disabilities to get out there. So, I want to give a little tip of the hat to the Game Commission for, trying to get people involved in the outdoors, no matter what the traditional background is. A lot of folks don't have parents that were involved in hunting. A lot of folks may be late life hunters coming into hunting for the first time in their 30s or 40s. And the Game Commission this year, at least as far as I'm concerned, is trying to do a really good job on bringing these folks in.
Yeah, yeah, they really have. They've got a great team in place there, their communications team, their field team. Everybody seems to be firing on all cylinders. They've got a pretty unified messaging strategy. They know where they need to increase access and to get more hunters engaged here in PA. So I think we're in pretty exciting times when it comes to just all the opportunities for hunting in Pennsylvania, the relationship with the Game Commission and others. I think it's probably some of the best we've had in a long time. There's been a lot of debate about things over recent years here in PA, but we've been through historical times like this before, and we usually end up much the better for it. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now too. So.
You mentioned looking forward. Is there anything you guys have in play where you're looking at strategic planning for, where you're going to go when you hit that 300,000 mark? I mean, what's the sky then? I know you're constantly in the funding mode and being able to do it. Are you guys like in schools talking about safety and hunter safety and, kind of cross-referencing some of these organizations?
Yeah, we're doing what we can. It's kind of tough because this is one of those things where this organization is basically I'm the only paid employee, so I'm
Yeah.
wearing a lot of hats on any given day, but we've got a great team of volunteer coordinators out there that work at sort of the county level to be sort of the local faces of Hunter Sharing the Harvest, and the champions out there that go to the local sportsmen's clubs and the county fairs and things like that to talk about the program. And then you've also got, we try to get involved to the extent possible with things like even the Department of Education and some others to try to encourage the meat cutting trades to be something that kids in school get an exposure to, or at least the opportunity to pursue as a vocation. Because a lot of times, like even in my local school districts here in the western part of the state, I don't think those kids are ever hearing about meat cutting as a trade. But there are some groups around the state that are doing that. There's some folks at the Department of Education and others that are actually talking about potential curriculums that would be developed for students at the vocational school level, where that would be an option to them, like through a culinary program or something. So we're interested in that type of thing. We've done some strategic planning in the last few years, and we developed a strategic plan in 23 for 5 years that basically just kind of sets the different goals that we have for our organization and what are our priorities, where do we see things, because you're right. We look at things like the processing industry, and it can be a little nervous now and then because that's an industry that's been sort of contracting in recent years. Now we've been fortunate the last few years where we've had a lot of sort of younger, newer processors coming into our program, ones that maybe before hadn't been aware of us and now they're hearing about us, so they're coming on board. But the industry as a whole is one that we look at, 5 years, 10 years from now, what's that going to look like? Are we going to have enough processors? If it continues to contract, are we going to have maybe a model where we've got some brick and mortar HSH processing facilities or something like that? There's been a lot of talk from different groups about trying to develop and scale up some form of mobile processing availability. That's been done in a lot of other states to one extent or another. So yeah, all of those things to us are the things that we're looking out on the horizon. You get kind of wrapped up in the day to day just worrying about where we're at right here and now, but you do have to constantly be thinking about where are we going to be years out so that this program can continue to grow, so that we can keep doing all this good for the hungry here in Pennsylvania and also support it. So.
Those are great ideas, Randy. I never even thought about a mobile processing unit, but that would be phenomenal, especially when you have big like municipal hunts where they're going in to call some of the herd and things like that. If you could, get on board with the municipalities that are trying to reduce the deer herds in local parks and state parks, and a mobile unit might be just the ticket for something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that. There's a lot of that access problem. It also another area where it can be beneficial is in some of the different agricultural areas where maybe farmers have a lot of activity going on there to try and reduce the deer herd on their property. Having a mobile unit nearby some of these larger farms that are doing some hunts would be helpful as well, so that we can at least, if nothing else, maybe they start the breakdown process out in the field, get them into a cooled unit, a reefer unit, and then from there maybe it goes to one of the processors. But you've taken care of some of that issue, especially like this time of year. August 1st started the ag tag season here in PA, so you've got hot temperatures, you got humidity, things like that. So the processing needs to happen real quickly in those situations. So that's another implication for having things like mobile units. So there's actually a group of people right now that we're all starting to talk about, how do we look into this type of option and come up with a model that might work and then fund that so that we can start trying to scale something up.
You mentioned that you guys have been around, Randy, since the at least 1991. Are you guys showing other models to other states? I'm sure you guys get a lot of feedback from other states just saying you guys are kind of the tip of the spear. We want to follow your model. I know you're the only paid employee, but how, do you guys interact and how does that interaction work from state to state?
Yeah, we do actually, and it's something that I've been really kind of proud of these last few years since I came on board. One of the first things that I was kind of concerned about, I was new to the nonprofit world. I was new to this whole world of running a venison donation program. I've been involved with HSH for about 25 years, but that was all volunteer as a coordinator, so I wasn't worrying about so much the inner workings of the organization. So the first thing I was doing 4.5 years ago was trying to look around to see who are my peers, who are my counterparts, who can I talk to about all of this, and so I started making a few connections, and it sort of sounded like they were doing the same thing, trying to develop a network. So over these last few years, we've actually developed an alliance that we've kind of loosely formed at this point called the American Sportsman's Hunger Relief Alliance, and it goes by the acronym ASHRA. But we all get together once a year and just kind of talk about best practices. And, this past year we were in Michigan here back in May, I guess it was, and had a nice meeting out there. We learn a lot from each other. We talk about how different programs operate. We get ideas for fundraising. The folks down there in South Carolina have been an active part of that group with us over these last few years. So we are starting to see that, and it is kind of it's heartwarming for me because they do tend to look at the Pennsylvania model. A lot of these folks have over the years even come to Pennsylvania and maybe met with John Plowman, my predecessor, and sort of just found out how we do this so they could take it back to their states and emulate that. And of course, everybody's doing their own uh, really unique things within their states to accomplish this goal. We think about whitetail deer here in PA. There are some states that are figuring out a way to make use of wild hogs and
Yeah.
different wild game
Right.
in different states that's very different than what we have here in Pennsylvania. So it's exciting, and it also starts to give us a national voice. It's one thing for us to talk about what we're doing with our individual states, but when you can, as a group, talk about this tremendous benefit that hunters are doing all across the country by donating their venison, you're talking about millions, literally millions of pounds of wild game that are being donated every year. So you look at those numbers just like we do in PA and then multiply that by about 38 states that I'm aware of now that have some sort of a wild game donation program. I mean, it's just amazing. And the more we leverage
Well,
that as hunters and sportsmen, and the fact that we're out there performing a social service when we're hunting in the woods, there's no better PR for the hunting community that I can think of.
That,
yeah.
that's exactly right, Randy. And, when we can do something good for everyone in our community, I don't think there's anything better than feeding the hungry. If you've ever experienced that, you know what a challenge it is to feed a family. And Pennsylvania, when you're talking deer hunting, I think we're definitely in the top five in the country in number of hunters and the number of deer taken. So Pennsylvania can really, have a leading role nationally with your model and everything you and your volunteers are doing. When we're talking about feedback, what kind of feedback are you getting from the organizations that receive the donations? And it's such a high quality, high protein donation. It's not, vegetables. It's not pasta. This is good quality venison, high quality protein. What are you hearing from the organizations and groups that receive it?
I'll tell you, that's where my job at the end of a day really gives me the reward. That's when I get a call from a regional food bank or a local soup kitchen or someone like that that just talks about how much they appreciate this product that comes to their clients. I mean, because typically in the food bank system, protein is going to come in the forms of fairly low protein items like peanut butter, tuna, things like that that definitely have a protein value. And I'm not in any way disparaging any type of food donation. We should all be trying to donate as much as we possibly can to these hunger relief agencies. But venison is just, you don't get a much better protein at all. It's so lean, it's literally almost fat free. It's so high in protein that from the food bank's perspective, it's a wonder food because it goes the furthest for them. It helps them achieve the most feeding of hungry people because you give a family a pound of venison, they're getting a pound of meat that's going to be shared, not what ends up being three-quarters of a pound of meat after it's all,
Right.
rendered down and the fat and everything else comes off of it. So the food banks, the whole hunger relief system just really appreciates this protein source so much that we're just getting calls all the time, and that's to me what a lot of times I'll go through a week or two of just getting mired down in the business of what we do here, and then all it takes is one of those letters to come across my desk or someone giving me a call or dropping me an email just talking about how much it means, or when I get a picture from one of our processors who's doing a distribution and there's literally a line of people snaking around the block. That part of it's not a happy moment for me, but it tells me that what we're doing is accomplishing something because those people in that line need that food so bad and it means
Yes,
the
sir.
world to them in that moment. To me, it's just, it's so much better than any other gig I've ever had.
Randy, that's one of the things we don't think about, man. This statistical nightmare of everything that you guys face and, all the logistical pinpoints you have to put together. And, you're bringing a lot of moving parts in with volunteers. And so I can't imagine your job from day to day. And those emotional boosts is what really keeps us going. And I just had something pop in mind. Do you guys ever do anything? I hunt a good bit down in Texas and they're just inundated with wild hogs and trying to figure out what to do. And I know this is something that would just be a big difficult step too. How do you do it? But are other states donating? We're seeing a need. The homeless population is in certain states higher than others. Are you guys sharing that information with anybody? Hey, reach out to Georgia or reach out to this state. They're inundated right now with a higher populace than we are. I'm just wondering how other states can get involved with excess meat.
Yeah, that's something where we're always trying to find other states that might have programs that we're not aware of, or maybe that have someone out there that would be interested in starting a program in their state where there isn't already one. Um, that can be a little bit more challenging because a lot of times we just don't know who those people are, so we don't have that resource to kind of know, who do I reach out to in whatever state to see if they could use some help. But I have seen like instances of last year. I know that some of our groups in the South had done some support to the areas that were ravaged by the floods, even maybe
Yeah.
crossing some state lines to help them out. Because at that point in the game, it was almost like, okay, we've got a real serious emergency situation here. We're going to do things a little bit different to help out some neighbors that just don't have the kind of volume of food coming in to support them. So that type of thing is, I think it all goes back to just the fact that as a group, we're starting to speak more with a unified voice. And so people are becoming more aware of these programs and what's available to them. And, we've all got these individual challenges. And I know that especially down there in the southern states where wild hogs are such a problem, and we're just up here in the north looking and thinking, boy, it's just a matter of time. We haven't got them bad, but we're starting to see them. Even I believe they've been seen here in Pennsylvania and some of the other states just below the Mason-Dixon line, just below us. But that's a case in point too, where you have to work through some challenges because, you know, how you how you prepare wild hog, what goes into the whole process of the harvest and keeping everything safe. I think of hogs like I do pork. There's more, you have to be a little more careful
Sure.
with it. It's part of the reason here in PA we don't accept bear. We get questions every year about will you take bear, and we just don't do it because of the fact that you really have to take some extra steps with that when you're preparing it. So the food bank systems are a little wary of receiving it because they just don't know what to tell their people, how do you
Right.
prepare this and so forth. So we don't handle bears here in PA. I kind of wish we could, but it's a difficulty for us. And I know the southern states are struggling with how do we figure out a way to make use of wild hogs, and certainly they are to a certain extent, but it hasn't become like a wholesale sort of opportunity for them where you'd really like to be able to see it, because that would be a way to really incentivize people to harvest more of those hogs. So
Absolutely. Randy, this may be a silly question, but is all of the venison ground? Is it all processed that way, or um, is it cut up like a normal cut, or is it all just ground meat when it goes out to the folks?
yeah, we do everything as ground burger. It's the most efficient way to distribute the meat. The food banks prefer it that way. Sometimes they're doing actual feedings at their location, so we might even have a processor that sends them like 5 pound bags of venison burger so that they can use it in chili or sloppy joes or spaghetti sauce or whatever it might be. And then from the distribution side, if they're distributing food to people, they want to just be able to provide them with something that they can go home and they'll know how to prepare it, because we
Yep.
tell them just prepare it the same as you would that same pound of burger if you bought it from the grocery store. We don't get hung up in the whole, oh, is it gamey or do I have to do something different with it? No, other than, if you're going to try and make hamburgers or something out of it, you
Oh,
might not get your best burger. So
right. Right.
but other than that, we tell people to just prepare it like you would any other pound of burger. So they'd rather have it that way than for us to be trying to distribute chops and roasts and things like that, or to have people saying, "Well, I'd prefer this over that." So
I know for me and my family, Randy, that's whenever I harvest a deer and I take it to the processor, I basically just say grind it up because we can uh, have that so many different ways. And if we
yeah,
have if we have people over for dinner or lasagna or what have you, everybody likes ground venison.
yeah.
It's not doing the roast, it's not doing the fillets, that type of thing. So I'm glad to hear that people can just get a package of the ground venison, take it home with them, or the food banks do it the same way. I think that's a high quality product for the folks of PA.
Yeah, and it's more efficient for the processors too, because we're also cognizant of the fact that, they're very busy. Again, they're working for us, so to speak, and they're getting paid, but they're not getting paid to do a full cut either.
Right.
So if they were having to go through all those extra processes and the wrapping and things like that, it just makes their job harder too. So burger is just all around the easiest way to deal with it. And I'm pretty sure my counterparts in other states are doing the same thing. One thing we get a lot of calls about, especially like this time of year, is when the calls start coming in from people saying, I've still got some venison in my freezer. Can I donate it through your program? Because I'm planning on, I'm going to be putting some more venison in there in the next couple of months. And for those people, we always just tell them to give a call to your local soup kitchens and food banks and things, and let them know you've got some venison you'd like to donate. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be happy to take that venison off your hands. For our operation, we don't do that because, our whole model is that we work it through the processor. We
Right.
know who did it, we know what the conditions were, and so forth. To take other venison where we don't know who processed it. It might have been self-processed. We just don't want to take that risk, because at the end of the day, we always have to remind ourselves too that we really hold ourselves to a higher standard, because we're providing a food source to the public,
Yep.
where they don't really get to make that informed decision like you do when you're standing at the grocery store and you're looking at something and deciding whether to buy it or not, or looking at it and saying, I think this looks a little sketchy, or
Right.
so we want to make sure that at all times when we think about the decisions we make, it all errs on the side of public safety and making sure that we're putting out a good, healthy, safe product. So,
You know, Randy, man, you are a jack of all trades, dude. You were mentioning all the hats you wear. You do it phenomenally, and I enjoy getting you on these shows, being able to chat with you and see all the stuff you got going on. You talked a little bit about distribution. What's a qualifying agent, or what is what? How do you go about who gets what? Is that just going through the food banks itself? Or you guys actually, you mentioned snake lines and people coming to get venison and whatnot. How do people go about qualifying?
That's a good question, and that's one that I get a lot too. I'll get people that'll call me and just say, I'm struggling right now. My family needs some help. How can I get some of that venison? Um, what we usually do then is we try to make sure that they get connected with a local hunger relief agency that can qualify them for that. So when it comes to how the venison itself is distributed, we give sort of a lot of that autonomy to the processor to decide where they want to send it. Now, that's within reason, like they can't just be, I shouldn't say they can't, but we don't want them to be just kind of one-off distributing it to people like right through their processor because we really do want to make sure those people have been qualified through some organization. We also want to make sure that those organizations get that opportunity to make sure they know what other resources might be available to them. So that's why we try and make sure people go to their local hunger relief organization, and same with the processors. They can send it to a local food bank or soup kitchen, a church run type of operation, or a regional food bank. We just want to make sure that obviously it goes to a bona fide hunger relief agency to be distributed as they see fit. But that gives a lot of freedom to those processors to be able to say, well, boy, I've got 3 or 4 organizations right here in my community or my county that I'd like to send this to, and then that does a tremendous service for them, for the people in that community, to know that the deer that were harvested right there nearby are also getting donated right there nearby. So that gives them a lot of freedom to have that kind of control. And then we'll also tell them, if you don't know who those organizations are, then your best bet is to send it to your local regional food bank. There's 9 of them here in the state, and they're really the best at then distributing that meat out to all of their member agencies and making sure that it gets distributed very well across their service area. So there's a lot of different options there that are available to the processors, but either one of them ends up making sure that that venison stays real close to home when it's donated. So,
Randy, if people would like to make a donation, what's the best way to support the group financially? Website, what's the best way?
yeah, the best bet is to visit our website. It's got all sorts of information about the program, opportunities to donate. Again, like individuals that want to donate some money can go right on there and make that donation through the website. People that have businesses or corporations that want to do a sponsorship can find out how to do that and contact me so that I can work with you directly to come up with a sponsorship that makes sense for you. But everything happens on the website, and it's a real easy one. It's sharedeer.org.
Man, it's one of those things. I appreciate your time, Randy. I know you're extremely busy. You're always a phenomenal wealth of knowledge. The way you convey it, the way you work with so many other organizations, it's awesome to see. A lot of times we see a lot of nonprofits and organizations that they just don't work well with others. I don't know why that is, but you guys are sharing and bridging a gap. And I just got to thank you again for taking time to acknowledge what's going on, how we can get involved. If you're ever in South Carolina, dude, Summerville is not too far from us. I'd love to get together. You let me know. But yeah, we want to be able to share all the information. We're going to tag all of this stuff in the post. But again, thank you for your time and efforts. I know you're a super busy guy. I'm sure Greg's got some more questions he's fixing to fire off. I see the wheels turning. But I also take a split second just to thank you, man, on a personal note. It's always phenomenal to see so many people bridging a gap and just taking care of their brothers. We are a brother's keeper. But
Yeah, I appreciate it. You guys are pretty busy guys too. Don't cut yourself short. I see you guys all over social media and doing what you do to talk about opportunities for folks with disabilities. So I appreciate what you do, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and just talk about our program. I take it any opportunity I can to crow about what we're doing here in PA. So
Randy, we sure appreciate you coming on. And really, if you get an opportunity to pass along to all your volunteers how thankful we are,
Yeah.
feeding the homeless and people in need here in Pennsylvania. That's just amazing work. I've lived here all my life. I've moved around the country, but the people of Pennsylvania are just good, hardworking people, and programs like this that can lift them up and give them a good quality meal and support hunting and conservation. There's just no negative at all. This is all a positive win. And I thank you and everybody that's involved with the program and would like to have you back on whenever you hit your 300 or at the end of the year when things settle down for you. I know this is your busy time when you're ramping up, but Randy, really thank you. We appreciate your friendship and all you're doing for the people of Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. I'll keep you guys posted on how things are going, and I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Randy, I got one before you get off here. Man, with all the hats you wear and as busy as you stay, do you ever get any stand time in? Are you putting
You
deer
know,
on the or man, is it you gonna get a chance to hunt it all?
that's the funny thing, everybody assumes that I must just be hunting all the time, because I'm in this organization like it's part of the job description or something like that. I probably get less time in the field than I did 4 or 5 years ago, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um, So when I do, and I'm always joking about the fact that, it's been like 2 or 3 years since I've even put a deer in my own freezer. So I'm going to have this huge moral dilemma when I'm standing there over a deer and I'm like, holy crap, do I put this in my freezer because I haven't had any good venison in a while? Or do I donate it?
Yeah.
Chances are I'm going to donate it, but
I know you will, Randy, but if you get a day, a weekend, or a day that you want to go hunting, you just drive down and see me here in Greene County, and we'll get you down either on some public land close to me or a little bit on the farm here. So I'd love to have you, and if we're fortunate enough to get a deer, I know Beth will make it for us. So we'll have dinner together and get some good venison.
I appreciate it. I'll be there.
Sounds good, man. Thank you again for all you do, Randy. And again, thank all the volunteers and the folks there. We'd love to have you in South Carolina. And we're gonna work on trying to figure out some new ways to do something with these pigs, man, because they're getting a little crazy.
I hear you. I hear you. I will definitely look you up next time I'm down there, buddy.
Sounds good, man.